Snowflake provides a compliance layer for all modern communication platforms. So all of the logos that you'll see here today and hundreds more, and these are all certified partnerships and integrations for all the tools that you'll be using in your business. We're the only vendor here that's backed by all of the unified communication platforms themselves. So the likes of Zoom, RingCentral, Slack, Salesforce, Cisco, execs from Microsoft, they're all our backers because we provide that compliance layer for their platforms. So when we talk about modern communications, what we're actually talking about here is unified communications. That might not be a terminology that you're used to if you're in a compliance function, but it's important because it tends to be your colleagues in unified communications who will actually implement these tools for you to help you comply and to help you meet your regulatory requirements. So what do we mean by unified communications? Well, basically, these are all the tools that you're using. So whether you're using screen share and polling in meetings, whether you're using chat and video, whether you're using fax and voicemail over VoIP systems, any of those tools that you collaborate on, share information, communicate, these all sit under this umbrella of unified communications. And what makes these even more complex is that these are all meshed together. So you could be in a chat and you can start a video call. You can be in a video call and you can share a chat. You can be in a voice call, jump to a video. You can be in a video, share a screen, a digital whiteboard and start working on that. So that makes a particularly challenging and complex environment for compliance officers to manage and oversee. And we've also got a workforce that's changed. So the workforce today that we have has never had a scenario where they've not had internet. They've never not had a mobile phone. They are comfortable in front of a camera. They are used to screen sharing. So the controls that we're used to putting in place around this, about controlling things, turning things off, don't really apply today. Now, I've been doing this a very long time, over 25 years. I've been a regulator, I've been a compliance officer. I have written rules, I have written controls. I have been an internal auditor, I have assessed the controls. And it's different. When it comes to unified communications, the control environment is different. So it's a very challenging environment, and we'll talk more about that later, what that means. So the platforms themselves, no doubt you will have a number of, whether it's Microsoft Teams, Zoom, Mural, others, you will have a load of platforms that you're working with. And even before the pandemic, there was a sort of massive growth in these platforms, but nobody could have anticipated just quite how quickly they would be adopted and implemented. So the growth trajectory has been great, and whether you are in a remote environment, hybrid, fully in the office, you will still be using those platforms. They will still be integral and the lifeblood of your organisations. But they do have this unique set of challenges in terms of volumes. Because obviously, different types of communication. And we talked about earlier about ChatGPT. When you start to add something like that, you're just generating more and more that need checking and supervising because it's coming from an even more dubious source. Statistic here, 45%, and using multiple platforms. You will no doubt be using multiple platforms yourselves, and that again creates challenges in trying to follow audit trails of what's happening and capturing all that information. So in terms of regulators, the panel before touched on this. The regulators themselves are using these tools. They are very aware of them. They already had existing rules. To have record-keeping rules, supervision rules isn't new. They've always been around. All that's different is the way that we're using them now. So we're starting to see guidance and rules come out that actually clarify, well, yes, you have had to keep records of emails, and of course, you're going to have to keep records of chats and other things. So we've had broad statements out of the FCA saying, look, just because you're in a hybrid environment, your recording obligations don't change. We've had FINRA talk about meetings with customers, if you're using screen share, if you're using any sort of visual, if you're doing any sorts of polls. Of course, that all needs to be recorded too. I think the statement from ESMA is probably the most definitive. They've actually said this includes everything from instant messaging, fax, through to video conferencing, and actually they're not even going to give a list ESMA because the technology changes so much that actually it will become out of date. So for ESMA, it's everything. You capture the lot. Now, you might have seen other regulators talk about this at conferences like this, and certainly they have said, you know, we expect you to use your common sense. We expect you to use common sense when it comes to this. And they're getting smart, actually. They talk to vendors like us. They want to know what's possible, what can be recorded, and they get really grumpy when they're told they can't do something, and actually they can, because they've either spoken to us or they've seen it in practice in another firm. And we've seen them losing patience now. So they've given out all this guidance, and then in probably the last 7 to 8 months, we've seen a massive flurry of enforcement actions around this, mostly coming out of the US, where we've seen more than $2 billion in fines across 20 banks for not being able to produce those records, not being able to get their messages. We know the UK authorities are asking difficult questions. A couple of weeks ago, the PRA, for the first time, we saw in an enforcement action mention messaging failures, not having records mentioned WhatsApp. We know that firms themselves are taking action against their own staff. They're actually deploying back salaries, bonuses. And even in the last week, since we gave in the slides for this event, there's been 3 more fines. So we've had another 2 banks with messaging failures. We had another bank with missing records, audio records. And these are self-reporting now. They know they're going to be found, so it's much better to self-report because your fine will be lower. So I expect that we're just going to see more and more of these coming through. Now, when you actually look at the detail of the enforcement actions, this isn't just a handful of people who are trying to evade supervision or trying to evade detection. It's actually quite systemic throughout the organisation, and it impacts senior managers, supervisors, even right through to compliance teams where records aren't being retained, which kind of is what is actually going on in firms. Well, what we found is I talked about how widespread these platforms are and how in use they are, and how many tens of millions of pounds have been spent implementing them, rolling them out. But actually, most firms roll out their platform with half the features disabled. So it means that their staff can't actually use the tools and they're doing that for compliance reasons, because they're thinking, well, maybe if we have a video meeting and we turn off chat, then we haven't got to record that chat. And if we don't have to record the chat, maybe we don't have to record any of the video. So there's this desire to control it, close things down, turn things off. It's very, very common, just to be compliant. But actually what's happening is that's creating other problems further downstream. Now, one of those problems is obviously this very topical issue of unmonitored communications. We did a survey. Over 500 compliance officers took part, financial services firms in the US and UK, independently undertaken, and 2 out of 3 are telling us that they think they've got unmonitored communications, which in an environment, when we talked about the fines earlier, is pretty worrying statistic, pretty telling, not that surprising. Because what's actually happening is the platforms that they compliantly use, like Teams, like Zoom, are being shut down so much that it's actually forcing staff to bypass the controls and go off and use other platforms like WhatsApp. So whether we think about WhatsApp because that always makes the headlines, but actually it's not WhatsApp, it's any messaging platform, anything that's not in your sort of compliance envelope, anything where your staff are forced to use something easier to share information because they need to send a big file or because that's how their customer wants to communicate. So that's the challenge we're facing by turning things off, bypassing all the compliance controls. And that doesn't work in an environment, a UC environment. Like I talked about earlier, it's all meshed together. It's very, very difficult to turn things off because in the workforce we have today, they know they can download an app. There's a consumer version. They will have their own device. And yes, you can issue corporate devices, and we've seen some of these that are so locked down that you can't do anything with them. So they actually bypass those rules to go and use something else, and then that creates that compliance challenge because you don't have the records and you can't supervise them if you don't have records. So we see this a lot in firms. We have some really big customers with very complex infrastructure. They've got trader voice, they've got wealth advisors who need videos that are pre-approved and that sort of thing. And the more friction that is put in the way to turn things off, they are the ones who are facing the biggest problems in terms of compliance. Because, as I say, those controls need to be bypassed. Folks need to be able to do their job. They need to be able to share information. They need to be able to communicate with their customers. And they are going around and turning to unsanctioned channels like WhatsApp. And I think what the real fallacy is, a mistake, is that you know that there's going to be an element of your workforce, a very small percentage, who want to do bad things, who want to evade the rules, who want to defraud customers. It's probably about 0.01% or less. And you design a system to stop that, and actually you create a bigger problem because you end up with 10% of your staff who are trying to do good things, just trying to do their job, being forced to use these other platforms. So it's a small problem to solve. It's a fallacy to try and control things to stop that problem that creates a bigger problem. And that's what's happening in practice. That is why we're seeing so many of these rules. This isn't entire compliance teams, entire senior management teams that are wanting to be off-channel evade detection. It's that the environment is so heavily locked down that they have no choice. So when regulators come in and ask for records, you can't provide them, and that's not a good place to be. So we talked about, very difficult situation when your regulator comes in and asks for records. Very difficult situation if you have a customer complain and you haven't got the records of what happened, or you have a counterparty to a transaction and they have kept the records. So being able to show what happened, to show you comply, is actually something you want to do to protect you. You need to have those records. You need to protect yourself and be able to give your side of the story. Now, we talked a little bit about reduced ROI because we know those platforms that have cost tens of millions of pounds are being rolled out without the features that your staff need to use. And that's the reason why we have so many backers in the UC space, because Microsoft and Zoom and Cisco, they don't want you buying their platforms and then only using half of it. That's not what they're there for. You won't get all the richness. So really, we'll help you turn those on. The other thing we see a lot is reduced employee productivity. And I'll give a recent example of this in a moment, where if you're not able to use your Zoom or your Microsoft Teams and you're forced to use something else, you're then, it's kind of, you leave the meeting. You can't really operate two platforms at once. So your productivity becomes reduced. You're not having your Zoom call and staying there. You're doing something else. And what's really tough as well is you make it hard for compliance, because if you're meeting, keep the records in that meeting, somewhere else messaging on a different platform. There's no way of linking up together. There's no way of knowing links to what. So we had a meeting recently with a bank who was a prospect at the time. They're now a customer, very complex environment. And we had about 10 people on their side, and there was about 5 of us, and talking about the issues they were having and what they needed to do. And it was evident about halfway through that some of the team had checked out. They came to a particular slide, and it was around costs. And they were all doing something else. So our CEO chirped up and said, well, I hope you're not all on WhatsApp. And they all sort of laughed sheepishly and said, no, we're not, we're actually on Skype for Business. Now, they hadn't migrated that, so Skype for Business wasn't so bad. But what it meant was that they had checked out of the meeting. So 5 colleagues were discussing something. They were saying, I think we should go ahead with this. We should proceed with this. They were obviously quite excited. But there was no link to the meeting. So afterwards, their compliance team would have had to try to figure out from the line of text that they kept from Skype for Business that said, we should go all in, let's do this. They had no idea what meeting that related to. Who was in the meeting? What was it about? Now, obviously, that was a vendor meeting, so it wasn't high risk. But you imagine that was with a customer who's complained, and you're having a separate conversation over here. No audit trail, no way to link that together. That's why it's so important to try and keep people in your tools that you've bought, enable them. So in that scenario, all they had to do was turn it on, and they would have avoided a whole load of sort of downstream compliance issues, and been able to use the platform as they intended. So this is an example of a chat, what it looks like. My colleagues in California would say it's awesome, very rich. You can do much more with them than email. You can share files, you can share messages, you can share links. You can jump to calls. You can, as I say, you can start a call. You can share a file. All those great things. So hopefully that's familiar. So that doesn't matter whether you're using a Teams messenger, whether you're using a Zoom, something in Cisco. That's a very rich environment, very, very different to email, and very different sort of information that you can share. But what happens with that message is you will no doubt have an archive system that is built for email. But these aren't email. And what's happening is they're being treated as email. So you think every single piece of that message, the bit where it says, hi, how are you, great, how was your weekend? Every single one of those is kept as a individual text message. And each file or anything else is forced to be an email. And they're not emails, it's never-ending conversation. So you're going to lose your context, you don't have your emojis, all the things that would change the meaning and the context of the communication, any edits, things that people have deleted afterwards, all reduced to this string. And you think about that over a week, or you think about over a couple of months, 6 months, a year. Absolutely impossible to follow that trail. Really, really hard for your compliance team. There's no way you can actually follow what went on in a year's worth of text messages. So this is the only sort of product thing I'm going to talk about really, is that you need to be UC ready. You need to be ready for modern communications. Your compliance team needs to be able to see what it looks like natively. It needs to see how it actually flows, what messages there are, what GIFs there are. They want to be able to jump to the video, look at that video, read the file that was shared, see if it was deleted, listen to the audio, look at the link. They need to understand and be able to see it. They don't want to be trying to figure out turning this into emails, what that might be. So you've got your full audit trail there. That's how you modernise your compliance stack. So you turn things on. You've got your records. When your regulators come in, you can provide them. You can provide them to your internal audit teams, investigations, if customers complain. You're using your platform in the way it should be used. You're keeping everybody in. And you're empowering your employees to do their job. You're making life easier for compliance and making life easier for anybody in your control teams. One of our customers said, the very least they expect from their compliance team is not to create like self-enforced errors where they're going to get fined millions and millions of pounds because they've turned everything off and forced everyone to use the message platform when all they needed to do was kind of open things up, make an environment where you can actually communicate how you need to. So I'm going to leave you with this stat from Gartner, which essentially we're going to be recording more and more information and communication at work. And of course, the basis for any analysis or any supervision that you do is the capture. You've got to have no gaps in your record, otherwise it's completely pointless. Make sure you've got fully captured communications. This is kind of the future. This is where we're going to be going. The quicker you kind of get ready to modernise this, fill those gaps, capture the communications in a way that you can actually review them. It's going to make life much easier. Now, we don't have a booth here today, so myself and the team are here to meet, so please do come and ask us any questions. If you think there's something we can help you with, it would be great to connect the app and just reach out. That would be great. Thank you.